John Harris, a dedicated police officer, made a life-changing decision 20 years ago when he adopted 6 unwanted black girls. He raised them with love and commitment, despite the challenges they faced as a multiracial family in a small town. Now 2 decades later, John's health is failing and the girls are all grown, but what they did next to repay the man who gave them everything will leave you speechless. What moved John to adopt them in the first place, and how did this act of kindness ripple through their lives? Stay tuned to find out, and before we dive in, let us know where you are watching from today. If this story of love, resilience and gratitude resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It was an unremarkable day when John Harris, a police officer in a large Midwestern city, was called to a scene at a rundown apartment complex. The details of the call were vague: an eviction gone wrong, children left behind. But what he found inside would change his life forever. Huddled together in the corner of a bare room were 6 girls, ranging in age from 3 to 10, eyes wide with fear and hunger. The social workers told him the story. The girls had been left by their mother, who had spiraled into addiction and eventually disappeared. The system had already failed them once, shuffling them from one temporary home to another, always on the edge of being split up. No one wanted to take on 6 children at once, especially not 6 black girls with trauma already written into their young lives. John stood there, his heart heavy. He'd never considered himself a father, not in the traditional sense. He was a cop, after all. His life was full of shifts and danger, with little room for anything else. But something about the girls, how they clung to one another, how they looked at him with the faintest glimmer of hope, made him pause. "Who's going to take care of them?" John asked the caseworker. She shrugged. "That's the problem. We don't have anywhere for them to go. They'll be split up." And that was it. That simple sentence, so casually delivered, made John's decision for him. He couldn't let that happen. He couldn't let them be torn apart, not when they had already lost so much. "I'll take them," John said, before he even fully realized the weight of his words. The caseworker stared at him in disbelief. "You sure about that, Officer Harris?" John nodded, knowing full well that this decision would change his life forever. And so, with the stroke of a pen and a leap of faith, John Harris became the father of 6 unwanted black girls. Bringing the girls home was just the beginning. John's bachelor lifestyle quickly became a thing of the past. The house that once felt quiet and empty was now full of laughter, tears, and everything in between. At first, the girls were cautious, unsure of what to make of John. They had been let down by adults before, and trust was something they didn't give easily. Sierra, the eldest at 10, took on a protective role over her younger sisters, often keeping a watchful eye on them and a wary one on John. Monique and Alyssa, the middle children, tested boundaries, rebelling in ways that only children seeking attention can. Meanwhile, the youngest, Naomi, only 3, attached herself to John immediately, clinging to his leg as if afraid he would disappear like everyone else had. John had no idea how to be a father. He was used to structure and order, things that didn't apply when it came to children who had known nothing but chaos. Bedtimes were a mess, meals were chaotic, and there were more tears than he had anticipated. But slowly, as the weeks turned into months, something shifted. The girls began to relax, to laugh, to trust. And John, well, John found himself becoming a father in ways he hadn't expected. Despite the joy that filled his home, there were still challenges. Some nights, John would hear the girls crying in their beds, missing the mother who had left them, wondering why they weren't enough for her to stay. John would sit with them, not always knowing what to say, but always being there, offering the one thing he could: presence. And though he couldn't fix the broken pieces of their past, he was determined to give them a future filled with love. As the girls settled into their new life with John, they soon had to face the world outside of their home, a world not as accepting of their unique family dynamic. John, a white man raising 6 black daughters, began to notice the stares when they went out to the grocery store or the park. His fellow officers, some supportive and others bewildered, made comments that ranged from confused to outright offensive. The girls themselves, especially Sierra and Monique, began to notice the way people treated them differently. At school, they encountered both subtle and blatant racism. Sierra, being the eldest, bore the brunt of it. Some teachers treated her like she was less intelligent, assuming she came from a troubled home because of the color of her skin. Meanwhile, the younger girls were often asked uncomfortable questions by classmates about their family. Why does your dad look so different? Where's your real mum? John did his best to shield them from the harshness of the outside world, but he couldn't be everywhere. He had to work extra shifts to afford the growing needs of his household, and with him gone for long hours, the girls were left to face the world on their own more often than he liked. At home, he would sit down with them, trying to talk about their experiences. "You're going to encounter people who don't understand our family," he said one night, after Sierra came home in tears. "But what matters is that we know the truth. We're family, and no one can take that away from us." The girls nodded, but John could see the weight they carried. He knew he couldn't solve everything. He couldn't change the way the world saw them overnight, but he could be there, every single day, to remind them that they were loved, cherished, and enough, just as they were. As the girls grew older and entered their teenage years, life became more complicated. Each of them was wrestling with their own struggles, and John found himself trying to balance his role as both a father and a protector. Sierra, now in high school, began to rebel. She stayed out late, hanging out with kids who didn't have her best interests at heart. She was searching for something, maybe answers about her birth family, maybe a sense of belonging that she hadn't fully found at home. Monique, always the loudest and most outspoken of the group, began to push back against John's rules. She challenged him on everything, from curfews to her grades, testing his patience at every turn. "You're not my real dad," she would yell during arguments, the words cutting John deeper than she knew. Alyssa and Naomi, the quieter ones, were more introspective, struggling silently with questions of identity. They wondered why they had been abandoned in the first place, why their mother hadn't wanted them. John tried to explain that it wasn't their fault, that their mother's struggles were her own, but it didn't stop the hurt. John felt the weight of their pain, but he was only one man. There were days when he questioned whether he was enough for them, whether he could provide what they needed. But despite the chaos, he loved them fiercely, and that love was what kept him going, even when the days were long and the nights were filled with slammed doors and angry tears. The stress of raising 6 teenage girls as a single parent began to take its toll on John. At first, it was small things, a persistent cough, fatigue that didn't go away, weight loss he couldn't explain. He ignored it, convincing himself it was just exhaustion from his busy life. But as the months went on, the symptoms became harder to ignore. One day, after coming home from work, John collapsed. He woke up in the hospital, with his girls crowded around his bed, their faces pale with worry. The doctor told him he had a serious heart condition, one that had likely been building for years. John tried to downplay it, telling the girls everything would be fine. But they weren't children anymore. They knew how serious it was. For the first time, the roles began to reverse. The girls, who had relied on John for so long, began to step up in ways they hadn't before. They cooked meals, cleaned the house, and took care of each other while John recovered. Sierra, despite her rebellious streak, became a leader, making sure her younger sisters stayed on track. Monique softened, apologizing to John for the things she had said in anger. The love that John had poured into them all these years was now being returned, in small but meaningful ways. John's health issues were a wake-up call for all of them. The girls realized that they couldn't take him for granted, and John began to accept that he couldn't always be the strong protector. He had to let them take care of him too. The years passed quickly, and soon the girls were graduating from high school. Each of them had taken different paths. Sierra earned a scholarship to a university out of state, while Monique decided to pursue a career in social work. Alyssa had a passion for art and planned to attend an art school, while Naomi, always the baby of the group, was still figuring things out. Graduation day was bittersweet. John watched with pride as each of his girls crossed the stage, wearing caps and gowns, but he also felt a sense of loss. They were growing up, moving on, and soon the house that had been filled with their laughter and arguments would be quiet again. After the ceremony, they gathered for a family dinner, reminiscing about their journey together. The girls, now young women, began to reflect on how far they had come. They talked about the challenges they had faced: racism, identity struggles, the pain of their past, but they also spoke about the love they had found in their unconventional family. John, listening quietly, realized how much they had grown. They were strong, capable women, and despite the ups and downs, they had all turned out better than he could have ever hoped. "I don't know what I would have done without you," John said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've given me more than I ever gave you." But the girls shook their heads. "You gave us everything, Dad," Sierra said, and the others nodded in agreement. That night, John went to bed with a full heart, proud of the family they had built together. He had no idea that soon, the girls would find a way to repay him in a way he never expected. As the girls moved into the next phases of their lives, the once bustling house became quieter and emptier. Sierra left for college out of state, while Monique found a small apartment downtown, working long hours as a social worker. Alyssa, enrolled in art school, spent most of her time painting, and Naomi, unsure of her path, took a gap year to figure out what she wanted. For John, the silence was deafening. He had spent years navigating the chaos of raising 6 girls, and now, for the first time in a long time, he was alone. The transition was hard. He missed the noise, the laughter, and even the arguments. His health continued to decline, and without the girls around as much, he often found himself reflecting on the decisions he made. Had he done enough for them? Were they truly happy? But more than anything, he missed them. Even though they visited when they could, there was an undeniable ache in his heart. The girls had been his life for so long, and now, with them pursuing their dreams, he couldn't shake the feeling of being left behind. Naomi, the last to leave, noticed this. Though she was the youngest, she had always been the most perceptive of John's moods. One evening, she sat beside him on the porch as the sun set, her eyes studying his face. "You miss us, don't you?" she asked quietly. John smiled, trying to brush it off. "It's just an adjustment, that's all. I want you all to go out and live your lives." Naomi frowned. "But you gave up so much for us, Dad. You don't have to be alone." John's throat tightened. "I don't regret a single thing, Naomi. You girls are my life." But even as he said it, John knew that the separation, though necessary for the girls' growth, was weighing on him more than he had anticipated. While the girls adjusted to their new lives, Naomi, always curious about their roots, began to dig deeper into their past. She reached out to the adoption agency, hoping to find information about their biological mother. She felt a strange pull to understand where they came from, a curiosity she hadn't expressed when she was younger. Her decision caused tension among the sisters. Monique, always the most pragmatic, was against it. "Why bring up the past?" she argued. "We have a family now, and that's enough." But Naomi couldn't let it go. She wanted to know the woman who had abandoned them, to understand why she had made the choices she did. Alyssa, quietly supportive, offered to help Naomi in her search. Sierra, busy with school, was indifferent, while the younger girls were conflicted. John, hearing about the search, struggled with his own emotions. He had always known this day might come, that the girls would want to find their biological family, but now that it was happening, he found himself torn. On one hand, he wanted to support them. On the other, he feared losing the connection they had built over the years. In the end, he sat down with Naomi and Alyssa. "I understand why you want to know," he said softly, "and I'll support whatever decision you make. But remember, no matter what you find, you'll always have a family here." Naomi nodded, appreciative of his support but still determined to find answers. Just as the girls were beginning to explore their pasts, John's health took a sudden and severe turn for the worse. His heart condition worsened, leaving him weak and in and out of the hospital. The girls, scattered across the city and beyond, were forced to put their lives on hold to take care of him. Sierra flew back from college, while Monique rearranged her work schedule to help out at home. Alyssa, Naomi, and the younger girls took turns staying with John, rotating between caring for him and managing their own lives. The house was full again, but this time under much different circumstances. The girls took shifts cooking meals, administering medication, and driving John to doctor appointments. He hated being a burden on them but couldn't deny the reality of his situation. He was growing weaker, and the girls were seeing it firsthand. I'm supposed to be the one taking care of you, John muttered one night as Monique helped him into bed. She smiled, brushing off his concerns. You've done more than enough, Dad. Let us take care of you now. Though John resisted the idea at first, he began to let the girls in, allowing them to repay him in small, meaningful ways. Their love, once chaotic and filled with teenage angst, had matured into something deeper, something rooted in gratitude and care. During one of their family gatherings, the girls sat around the living room, discussing John's declining health in the future. They knew he wouldn't be around forever, and the thought weighed heavily on all of them. It was Naomi who first voiced the idea. What if we started a foundation? Something in Dad's honor, something that helps kids like we used to be. The room fell silent for a moment as the sisters processed her suggestion. Slowly, their faces lit up with excitement. That's actually a great idea, Sierra said, sitting up straighter. We could help foster kids, abandoned children, kids who don't have anyone. Monique nodded, her mind already spinning with possibilities. We could raise awareness, fund programs for foster kids. We know the system, we know how hard it is. John, listening from the corner of the room, was overwhelmed with emotion. He had never expected this. His girls, the same ones he had raised through hardship and sacrifice, were now talking about building something in his name, something that would carry on his legacy long after he was gone. I don't need anything like that, he started to say, but the girls quickly silenced him. This isn't about you needing it, Dad, Alyssa said softly. It's about what you've done for us and how we can give back. John looked at each of them, his heart swelling with pride. He couldn't have imagined a greater gift. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity as the girls threw themselves into building the foundation. They named it the Harris Home, after John, and dedicated its mission to supporting children in foster care and raising awareness about the challenges of adoption. Each sister brought something unique to the table. Monique, with her background in social work, handled outreach and partnerships with local agencies. Sierra, in college for business administration, helped with the logistics and financial planning. Alyssa, the artist, designed the logo and promotional materials, while Naomi took charge of the foundation's online presence and social media outreach. Despite the many challenges, the girls worked tirelessly, determined to honor John in a way that would have a lasting impact. And through it all, John watched with quiet pride, knowing that the love he had poured into his daughters was now being poured back into the world. But even as the foundation grew, the girls faced setbacks. Fundraising wasn't easy, and they often found themselves frustrated by the slow pace of progress. But they refused to give up. The Harris home was more than just a tribute to their father. It was their way of ensuring that no other children would go through what they had experienced. John, though weak, continued to offer guidance when he could. He sat in on meetings, offering advice and encouragement, even as his health deteriorated.